Hi, I'm Dr. Lynette Louise, also known as the Brain Broad. Recently, I've had to be a bit of a broad, so I've been really aware of my strength as a woman. As you may have gleaned from some of my stories, I often have to be very much the strong person putting down boundaries, while also being the person who is plumping you up with compliments. So it's that balance of things that I see as the magic in helping make change for anybody, positive change in the world and in the brain and in the body. Don't exercise too much, exercise a little. Um, and that's usually what I talk about. This particular series is dedicated to storytelling, kind of sharing a little bit of how the way that each family embraces their own identity affects the changes and the learnings of the child within the family. And I was thinking a lot, so I talked a lot about, in one story, you get the idea of too many yeses, somebody who has no boundaries. And in the next story, you get the idea of what happens when you have too many no's, somebody who puts on too many boundaries and not enough compliments. And, I wrapped it into some of the cases that I've seen. So I thought, what can really share something bigger now, something that puts it together and isn't just about the yeses and the nos, but rather it's about sort of that, the choices you make, not just in your life, and my personality is I'm a fashionista, so I care about clothes, not just that, but my idea of myself affects my moment to moment, crisis to crisis, happening to happening, responding. And I was thinking about the pandemic, and it feels right to me that we talk a little bit, not primarily pandemic, but crises, pandemic, happenings. Like, there could be a death in the family. It could be the loss of a particular teacher, or shifting schools, or changing homes. It could be all kinds of things, but each of us will address that differently. Some people will go, yay, adventure. Oh, I'm talking about myself. Some people will go, no, I can't do it. No, I can't do it. My child needs rituals and needs everything to be the same. And so how we do that will really affect not just our children, but us. And I think it's really important to be aware of yourself as you come into something as big as a pandemic. Now I'm going to add one more layer to this, and that's where I'm going to focus the talk. Are you a finger pointer? And by that I mean, do you seek to blame? And this has been really brought home during this period of staying in and mask wearing and vaccines and all this anger and Black Lives Matter. And in every part of the world, this has really changed how people feel about taking action and who's to blame. And they're paying attention because they got off the gerbil wheel of work and started looking. And if you're a finger pointer, you did it in a certain way. Now, in autism, which most of the parents who are watching this are dealing with someone with autism, that's already in existence. Inside of our population, we have the people who are the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers. We have the people that are pro-facilitation, pro-rapid prompting, pro-ABA, pro-sunrise, pro-floor time, right? Like, it doesn't matter. There's so many people that are pro-something. And when you're inside of that and you're a finger pointer, that means you're against the other. So I'm pro this, I'm against that. Quick story. I'm going to tell a couple. So I met this family. I only met them once, but they were very much about the anger and hate because they saw their children as vaccine damaged. They had 2 boys. They had gotten to the place where each parent had to sleep with one of the boys, so they were in separate rooms, hanging on to them to get any sleep at night. Everything was padlocked. The house was totally trashed. The pool outside. The above ground pool had been ripped to shreds by one of the boys who loved to rip really difficult things, especially thick plastic. Unbelievable that he could do it. And they had a daughter as well, who, in my opinion, was probably Asperger's, but she was so high functioning that comparatively they couldn't see that, right? Or like, no, this girl's got nothing. There was definitely a genetic component running through that, but all the mom could feel and see was the concept of vaccine damage. And I'm not saying that that wasn't playing a part at all. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that she was doing herself and her children a disservice if she wanted them to learn, if she wanted them to grow, because she was so wrapped up that she was angry all the time. She was making phone calls all the time. She was hating everyone that said anything else, like added a branch to it. And yet she wanted to get advice from me on how to help them learn. And I'm like, you got to drop that. You just got that. Because as long as this is your motivator, you're just going to continue to prove over and over again, using your children as proof, that your life is horrible and that you've been harmed and that you deserve some kind of compensation for that. Except you're not really going after compensation. You're just going after hate and anger. And you're writing books about it and you're writing blogs, but you're not taking the reins, and you're also not helping your kids. All right, so that's logical, right? I'm sure you understand that. But what I want you to understand is that the children are being shaped by it. Not just by the choices the mother is making, and then the father as well, by the way. I'm sorry for always being about a mom, but I'm a mom, and that's where it comes from. So both of them are making these choices. She's more verbal and more the sort of the head pointer, right? The head pointer. But their talk, their communication, the things they say to their daughter, the things they say to each other, the choices they make in all walks of their life circle around this hate and this anger. And the children know, they hear. They're nonverbal, yes, they're nonverbal. They're big. They're like 18, I think, 18 and 16. But they are hearing that they are so broken and they have been damaged and that they are unfixable because of what's happened to them. And they are playing out the part. And the one boy really, I think, was really in just sort of a I respond to whatever energy comes my way mindset. But the other boy was sneaky, the one that was ripping up the pool. He had some IQ points there to work with, and he was playing it out. And they were being tormented. So they didn't want my positive spin. They didn't really want my help. They wanted to be able to talk to me and then say, look, she doesn't get it. She's not on our side, but I am. I'm on their side. I want their life to be better. I want their children to feel comfortable in their bodies. That isn't someone who became my client, right? But I've seen this in these short spurts and in big ways, in many, many homes. And where that really came into fruition was in the pandemic. So here we have all these people with all these different personalities going, oops, we have to stay home with our kids, and we don't know what's going on, and we're not going to work, so we better check what's going on. And they start paying attention to the news maybe in ways they never did before. And so where families generally sort of circle around the challenged child or children, and they sort of circle around them and circle around them, make all their choices around them, make all their food choices, play choices, housing choices, teaching choices around the issues that they see and the beliefs they hold about that, all of a sudden they shifted. And they started looking at the news and at what was happening and feeling out of control, and the noise in the house was still happening more than ever. And they were no longer circling, and they were looking for somebody to blame for the mess they were in. And there was this division that began to happen in many of the homes where the focus went to the news instead of to the family or to the child, and was waiting for permission to go back to the this circling. And they started circling the news and feeling controlled and pointing fingers. And the news is a finger pointing medium. So you start to feel angry and hateful and frustrated and locked up. And because you're told, this is a really hard time for you. You're having a hard time. So you're like, yes, I am. But really, it was an opportunity. And some people understood that. So in this shifting between you, you forget to circle, which, it's got its problems. And we could talk about that another time. It's got a lot of problems. But when you shift like this and start focusing on the news and start talking between you and your husband, or your husband and your wife, or your wife and your wife, or your husband and your husband, when you start having these conversations on the phone, and you're having them with each other, and you're watching this, and you have the news on all the time, your children are listening, verbal or not. They're listening to your energy, they're listening to your responding, they're listening to your anger, they're listening to your fear, and you are changing how they operate. So here you have this opportunity with these kids at home to really kind of reconnect and not give away your power to all the experts, but actually take the power and hang out and get to know each other and solve some problems together. But too many people were going, do we go back yet? Do we go back to work yet? What's happening? Are we in danger? And this constant play of the news in the house changed and brought up a lot of anger and a lot of, acting out amongst the kids, a lot of meltdowns, a lot of things that people thought were simply because their children were staying home and not going to school were happening because of the way that you pulled away and focused into the news and felt that anger and fear yourself and passed it on in an environmental tone and information. So I'm going to close with a really short story because that was very conceptual. I started with a little story. I'm going to close with a story. So there's this family that I've known for a long time. They're lovely. They've made a big change in the last little while. A few years ago, they moved from one side of the country to the other. They've done great work with their nonverbal, semi-verbal, kind of verbal guy, right? So he's come along a trajectory. He's doing really well. But he has an edginess that is often helped by neurofeedback and otherwise helped by and behavioral approaches. And he's really grown into a lovely person. But during the pandemic, he started wanting to have a gun and shoot somebody, a particular somebody. And, the mom says, what's going on? What do you think I should do? And how should I handle this? And now I know this family, so I had a blessing of, knowing in advance some of the choices. And one of the things that this young man really was addicted to, even when I would see him in the other part of the world, remember? They went from one coast to the other. He loved to listen to Glenn Beck on the radio. So he would wait and he would listen. And at the time, I actually didn't know who Glenn Beck was. I had to check. So there's a tone in that. There's an angry tone that really kind of fed this boy. He really loved this feisty, angry tone, and he would sit and listen, and he didn't even have great conversations. He was barely verbal at the time, but he loved this radio show. So when they switched, he did really well he went from homeschooling to schooling. Things were really going well, but the pandemic came along. And there was some going back to school happening, but there was still all of this anger around the, Trump versus Biden, the masks, not masks, all this anger in the conversations at school around him. And then in the radio shows he was choosing. So when the mom reached out for me, I said, well, here's what I think, knowing your son. I think he's picked up that there's a really big problem and the only way to fix it is to shoot someone. And fortunately, he's not the kind of guy that would have access to something like that or that had the skill to do it, but you do want to nip this in the bud. Now, here's what's interesting. When she first asked me, she said, you know, should I get him a gun, teach him how to shoot properly, just a pellet gun or something? And so she was getting advice that, you know, he was having a want and he should be trained in it. And, you know, I understand that advice too. But I knew him well enough to know this is not a good idea. You're feeding this fury. Let's just tell him the truth. Let's just make him more informed, and also check in the environment and see if any of the teachers that he's working with or that are, you know, standing there on break while the kids are doing stuff is going, I can't believe this is going on and somebody should just shoot him, right? So sure enough, that's what was going on in the environment. And change the radio show, inform the teachers that they have to be careful what they say around him, give him some real information, and ease up on the hate, and guess what? All well and good. So you really want to understand that verbal or nonverbal, your children are listening. And what a blessing, because you get a moment to say, wow, how did I get so wrapped up in hate and finger pointing? What a waste of time. Stop it. Embrace everything. Make your choices. Assess. Don't judge. And say, you know what? I want to move forward in life with my children. Instead of, I want to blame you, and I want to blame you, and I want to blame you, and you're wrong, and you're wrong, and you're wrong. You know, just a closing thought, but I think every therapy works for someone. And I think every approach benefits some people. And if we spend all our time being angry with the other people that aren't thinking the way we're thinking, there's a lot of fallout. And the fallout is your family and you and your health. So for your child, for your other children, for your spouse, for yourself, let's don't point our fingers at others, because it ends up hurting us. I'm Dr. Lynette Louise. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I don't know, push some bell or something. I don't do this thing well. But I hope I helped, okay? Talk to you next week. Oh, I got my little trusty thing. I don't have to reach forward. Let's see if it works.